Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I read The Murder Game by Carrie Doyle. Released in 2021, this young adult murder mystery surrounds a few boarding school students and the death of the very polarizing second wife of the dean. Now, Doyle has authored a plethora of other books, including the Hamptons Murder Mystery series and the Trouble in Paradise series. So if you like this book, you can find more of her work on her website or on Amazon or wherever you buy books, of course. Now, side note, I have changed locations. I moved into a different place. So I'm trying to get the visual set up, looking, I don't know, like a little better. Right now, it's just kind of me at my desk, because everything's not out of boxes yet. But so over the next few weeks, I assume that the visual will probably change slightly, a little bit. You can see, like, I think a little bit of my bookshelf, but I have another one, and then I'll probably be getting a third bookshelf. So we'll see how I can incorporate that and be like those cute, like, booktubers who have like a wall full of books. Okay, so this book is set on the campus of an isolated boarding school, and it mainly takes place on the actual campus, but also in the surrounding forest. Now, of course, the murder game, there is a crime here at play, which is the murder of Joanna Heckler, who was attacked while Luke and his friends were playing hooky. They were out past curfew in the woods, so they were doing something they were not supposed to be doing. And Heckler was found dead the next morning. And then Luke realizes that he is surrounded by people with enough reason to kill her. So when it comes to the murder game, it's really just him trying to figure out what's happening. Now, the crime took place out of Luke's vision, but within his earshot, and the audience is left only to the details retained or seen by Luke. Okay, so the title, like I just said, The Murder Game, it's kind of like setting the tone for a whodunit. So something's happened, and you're going to have to figure out what took place. The chapters, and this is the first time I've actually ever seen this, the chapters are titled by tally marks. So not Roman numerals, like the actual 4 lines and then a fifth one slashed across it. And I think there are like 30 chapters, and there's literally like 30 tallies. So, but that serves the purpose, because when you're tally marking something, that usually is an indication that you're counting down to a big event, or something's taking place, which for us in this instance would be finding out the truth. But it's also a callback to Luke's unfortunate incident, which we will discuss in just a moment. Now, the tone of this book is very tense, very speculative, and there's just an overall sense of paranoia, which I think comes with any well-written murder mystery, because when you don't know what happened, everyone is a suspect and everything is sketchy. So it's I'll say this, usually with like these types of books, or even like TV shows and movies, I don't watch this type of stuff at night, especially if I'm by myself, like, because I get creeped out very easily. So it's that type of atmosphere, which is perfect. And lastly, the perspective, which you can probably infer by now. We get the narration via our protagonist, who is Luke. So the implications of this are whatever happens out of his eyesight is unknown to us, because we're in his head. Okay, so Luke is a student, and he plays a plethora of roles in this book throughout the narration. He is mainly our protagonist with a past. He is essentially like the lead detective in trying to figure out what is going on and what happened to Joanna Heckler. but he's also this cookie cutter good guy. So meaning he follows the rules and he abides by the social standards of success. He goes to class, he studies, he gets good grades, he excels in sports and clubs and different things. So he's one of those good students. Throughout the book, we see him go from this scared child to this courageous figure for multiple people, and he kind of becomes his own hero. And that's because he also was kidnapped a few years prior, and from that point on, he luckily, escaped and survived, but now he's known to everyone as the boy who was kidnapped. And there's a certain level of pity that follows him around with that, in addition to his other stuff that he's going through. He jumps from, being the boy that was kidnapped and escaped and survived to this boy who saves the day. So going back to the tally marks for the chapters, that's kind of like, it was alluded to the fact that he was keeping track of the days that he was in captivity when he was kidnapped. And so that's, a callback to that situation as well. Now, as far as motive goes, there's seemingly no motive. He's our narrator, which means we've stuck with him throughout the entire plot. And so as far as, him having an alibi for the murder, we know we were there with him. We know he didn't commit this murder. But I will say, the writing was so good in this book that, like, at one point I started to question if we knew everything about this guy. I almost took it to, I don't know if there's any Marvel fans that listen, but with Moon Knight, how like he has at the beginning of Moon Knight, he has like 2 different personalities. I was like, what if we don't know like another part of Luke? What if he actually killed the murders and we just don't know because he's not aware of it? He's not, he wasn't present in that moment. I don't know. Which is funny, but for all intents and purposes, Luke is our protagonist. Okay, now Oscar is a foil character. He is also a student with Luke. He is Luke's roommate, and he's a foil character because seemingly every character trait that he has opposes Luke's character traits. Now, I want to just put this out here, and this is not a spoiler alert, but it's more of a comment on different character types. Just because he is the opposite in every way of Luke does not mean he is automatically the antagonist. And that's something that I had to remind myself of. It's not that, because I wanted a word to describe him, it's not that he's the antagonist, he's just a character that is so opposite of Luke that Luke is, those qualities of him being a good guy are emphasized. But then on the other hand, those qualities of Oscar, of him being this almost like this bad boy, are emphasized as well because he's roommates with like one of the best students on campus. Now, as far as his bad boy persona, we're literally introduced the first chapter to them sneaking out, in which we find that Oscar is like the head facilitator of this like breaking the rules rendezvous thing. So, that speaks to the things that he is about. And throughout the book, we realize that he also gets in trouble quite a lot. But we're not talking bad trouble. We're talking about like typical student trouble where he doesn't really care about anything, or not student trouble, typical teen stuff where, he's just intent on doing things his way, and he gets detention a lot, or, gets to talk to the dean a lot because he's always in the office. Now, his character arc from beginning to end it's a lot more subtle than I would say Luke's, but it's still there. I would say it's kind of like a very wide arc, but he's kind of gone from very rebellious to almost redeemed, with characters that are so, what's the word I'm looking for? they're characters that are so well fit into the mold of bad boy or good guy. People are going to treat you as such, and it's almost like you won't ever shed that label. But with him, it's almost like we see that label kind of being pulled away. He's still a troublemaker, good trouble. Well, bad for him, but he's not out here committing crimes. That wasn't a spoiler, but he kind of goes from being known just as the kid that can't get it right to just being seen as a student who has been known to break some rules. And that's an important distinction, because he's seen as, throughout the book, he's seen by everyone, as students, as staff, as everyone, as this like figure of just destruction. And although he doesn't really follow rules, doesn't do his homework, whatever may have you, that doesn't mean that he's to blame in every situation. So now, as far as his motive, honestly, it's just his persona. So him carrying that label around as the kid that doesn't really care about school and stuff like that. And there's also layers to that, because it's discovered that his family is quite wealthy, and the money kind of keeps him in the school essentially. And it's a given that he's going to go off to college, probably because his parents can afford it, but also because they donate, whatever X amount of money to Harvard or something like that. So, but his persona that follows him around, that is his motive, because people already see him as someone that is, if there's good and bad, you're in the bad side because you don't follow the rules. So, okay. Next character is Pippa. So Pippa, I guess you could say she's kind of a tertiary character in the background for a good portion of the book, but she's present enough to talk about her. Honestly, she's just very sketchy. She plays the role of a sketchy suspect very well. She also plays the role of foreigner, so both literally and like kind of figuratively, because she's from Britain. Therefore, she's an outsider with a lot less to lose, quote unquote, than some of the students on campus. So we all know how teenagers and students are at that age. If you're any type of different than them, then you're already kind of seen as someone who doesn't belong. So, that kind of puts her in a shady limelight at first. Her character arc, in my opinion, was not completed. I would say more so, I guess, kind of along the lines of Oscar. It's just that we were able to see more layers of her personality, but there wasn't necessarily like any hint at redemption, because we don't really know much about her still at the end. So in my opinion, she's still sketchy by the end of the book. And her motive is that she is, what we find out, is already embroiled in international scandal, which is crazy. So that kind of puts her further into the sketchy limelight. And last character, Mr. Tadeckis, something like that. He plays the role of the eccentric. He's also the voice of wisdom, and the most creepy of all, he is that fly on the wall. And this is because he's an what is it? He's like the outdoorsy professor, or I forget like the exact title, but he's the professor that teaches the survival skills person that teaches them how to survive in the woods. So he knows the forest very well, and thus he's seen and heard a lot of things. His character arc, he kind of goes from like being a straight weirdo to a hero, which is very interesting. His motive, though, is that he knows way too much. He knows a lot of information, and this can come from him being a fly on the wall, but it's like, why were you a fly on that wall? Like, why do you know all of this? Thus, he is a suspect. He's responsible for informing Luke of a lot of the pertinent details that Luke wasn't really paying attention to prior. And he wasn't even like the type of person that would outright tell him. He would kind of lead him in that direction. And so he has this aura of just very what's that word? He's not sketchy, but he's very not secretive. Elusive. Elusive is the right word for him. Also, he is responsible for the most creepy quote ever of this book, and it's repeated a few times, and it creeped me out every time I read it. Every time. It was so creepy, but it also kept me on my toes. So he is seen a few times giving Luke like kind of advice or whatever. Also, he's like the only one that has real honest conversation with Luke, because it's almost like he doesn't really have anything to lose. Like, he's just like, whatever. Like, he's a very real person, and he's the type of person that if you ask him the right question, he's going to tell you the answer regardless. He doesn't care about getting fired or, none of that nonsense. So in one of those conversations, he says to Luke, what you don't realize is that they're all lying to you. All of them lying, your own roommate included. That's the creepiest stuff ever, because that feeds into the paranoia of not being able to trust anyone. So then every time you read that quote, every time Luke hears it, he's like re-examining why everyone around him specifically can be involved in this crime. Okay, just a few fairly obvious themes. First one is murder. Joanna Heckler, who was murdered at the beginning of the book. This crime is the center of the plot. It's the incident that is indirectly witnessed by students and possibly others. And also something that I did not expect was the polarizing past of Joanna extends the list of possible attackers. So what we find out is that Homegirl was not really liked by anyone, specifically married women. So that added another layer of like, okay, nobody really likes this woman. So everyone has some type of motive at this point, because nobody really likes her. In fact, a lot of people disliked her. So, and second, there's a second kind of murder mystery going on here in the background. Pippa's best friend. So this incident was buried intentionally. So it's not something that came out forthright. And it's the side plot that weaves through Pippa's backstory as well as like her motive, because if she's already somehow involved in this nonsense, what are the chances that there's now something else taking place and she's here present for it as well? The second theme is rebellion. Just, the general rebellion of high school students and being on a boarding school. I cannot imagine being in high school on a boarding school. Like, that would probably be really crazy. It would be probably really fun at first, but I'm just thinking back to my freshman year of college and how, like, the first time on campus and living in the dorm, like, you felt like awesome until midterms hit, but it's like your first taste of independence. So that whole idea of having high school students in the middle of nowhere on campus, even though they have curfews, yeah, whatever, they're probably at some point going to test the limits, and that they did, and they do frequently. Oscar is a perfect example of this. He has a plethora of incidents. He's a rule breaker, and he also has 2 strikes against him with the high school admin. So, he's like the personification of rebellion. And Luke also has, kind of this layer of rebelling against the admin to protect his friend, which is surprising because, he's like this good guy that follows the rules, but even he gets pushed to the place where he's like, look, I need to help my friend, and that means that essentially he's disagreeing with like a lot of the adults in the area, which is a scary place to be in, because the adults who are in charge, you're now kind of going against them and you're going to take up your own investigation. Yeah, okay. Okay, and last theme is fear. Luke has some severe PTSD, and I don't know why. Like, it's mentioned that he kind of went to therapy at the behest of his parents, but he was kidnapped a few years prior, and so along with the trauma of being kidnapped, he also now has this reputation amongst his peers that he's that kid from the news that was kidnapped. And so it's almost like a level of pity following him around, but also just the idea of people just talking about him in general and just talking about him behind his back. He has really intense PTSD induced fear. And so when things happen, it's like this thought in the back of his head, like, oh no, what if it's happening again? What if I'm being kidnapped again? And adding to that fear for everyone is the strangler myth. So there's like this rumor that there's a strangler in that area that, committed a murder a few years prior. And now with Joanna Heckler's murder, they're kind of linking it together and everyone's like feeding into this theory. And really what happens is it produces hysteria amongst the students, and it intensifies as we, go on, because no one can figure out who is to blame. So they're putting it on this fictional character. I will say that though that there's like a possible link to the strangler theory, but really what happens is it just contributes to the spectacle around the case. And this then leads to the students seeing Heckler's death as like an exciting event to talk about and theorize about, and they're not really respecting the fact that like someone was murdered. So it's like when you feed into like the chaos surrounding theories about real life events, you lose like the humanity within that. And that's what these students did. They would see all these police officers around investigating and all these new rules, and all these theories are flying around, and it almost turned into a game for them. So the title was very accurate or reflective of what became of this case. Okay, so when it comes to my review, the atmosphere of this book is very reminiscent of Pretty Little Liars season 1. And I say that specifically because when season 1 of Pretty Little Liars came out, everything was so brand new, right? So everything was a mystery. Everyone was still a suspect. You felt like you really couldn't trust anyone. And that like feeling of like that creepy feeling of like trying to figure out what happened to Allison and Pretty Little Liars, like I just got that whole vibe from this book, and that was fantastic. And honestly, there are some parallels between the show and this book. For example, like there's a victim, which is Allison in the show and Joanna in the book. There's 4 main students that are taking it upon themselves to solve the crime, even though there's police and detectives and other people and adults that are involved in tracking down the truth. And there's also kind of like this outside loner who knows a lot because they observe a lot, which is Toby in the show, but Mr. Tadeckis in the book. So, I thought it was very cool. It was very captivating. It was very creepy. It creeped me out. That quote creeped me out, but I didn't put it down. And I actually stayed up to read this book one night. And I remember when I finished, it was like 2:57 a.m., which, listen, as an adult, that just does not fly nowadays, because it's like the next day I was so tired and like I have stuff to do. Like I gotta go run errands and pay bills, but this book was worth staying up late at night to finish reading. Now, I was like trying to search and see if there was a second book, but I don't think there's been one that's like been exactly announced. I've like heard chatter on Twitter, but nothing confirmed. But honestly, I think there's enough material to write a second book. Obviously, the author is very comfortable with writing series of murder mysteries, so I think that this could easily, expand into a second, maybe third book. And I have a theory. I feel like Pippa, Pippa and Luke can travel to Britain to investigate, the murder of her best friend. And then, in my theory, I feel like there's a very strange, eerie link between Pippa and Luke's kidnappers. And I think that if there's a second book, that's going to be revealed because Pippa's from Britain and one of Luke's kidnappers had a British accent. Coincidence? No. There are no coincidences in murder mysteries, period. So that's just me throwing stuff out there. But is this a reread? Yes. I need some time though to kind of digest. But this was a nice, fun read, and it was a good murder mystery. I would put it up there with like the Agatha Christie's because it's a cast of people that have really good reason to be involved in the crime, and it's like I love that feeling of like being so paranoid that you don't know if you can even trust the character that you're following around. So, very good book. As you can see, if you're a visual person, I bought it from Target, but you can pick it up anywhere pretty much. So, and my only takeaway here is that the best murder mysteries are accompanied by a cast of sketchy characters and multiple motives to kill. Always. So, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. I am currently reading Good Morning Love by Ashley Coleman. So this will more than likely be the next book I review. And then I have a plethora of other books, so I don't know what's going to be after this, but this is another fiction piece that I'll be taking on. So yeah, stay tuned for that. As always, follow our Instagram page at A.IdlePodcast. That's the one I update the most. And if you have any suggestions, just let me know. So thank you so much for tuning in. I will see everyone next week. Thanks.